Good morning.
Good morning.
As we're still trying to figure things out, as we're still trying to get things going, we're trying to record as it's going to be a little bit different. So we're going to do this. You know what? Just got through with the Book of Mark. That little short time we spent there in the Book of Mark. I really enjoyed that book and really enjoyed the ideal of preaching through that. And as I was praying about what book to go through next, it really just kept coming back on the Book of Esther. About a book that God just ordains, and just the things that he does, that little thread that he runs for things to happen behind. He works behind the scenes. And you know, I've read Esther plenty of times. And I think we've done a Bible study on Wednesday night with Esther. But I've never really sat down and studied it and pulled things out of it. And so that's what we're going to be doing. I'm chapter 1, 1 through 22. It's in 396 in your Pew Bible, 465 in mine. But I digress. I entitled this, Don't Get Tripped Up. Just the kind of way it was, I was really thinking about this and looking at the way things happen, and in chapter 1, and talking about our Christian walk a little bit and things that can trip us up in our Christian walk. And so I'm not going to read the whole chapter due to time constraints, because I got a little backstories. I'm going to have to fill in some things and do some things. So I will be reading it later. But let's just go ahead and go to the Lord in prayer, and then we can start. Lord, Heavenly Father, just in all of you, in all of everything that you've done for us, in all of everything that continues to go on. Lord, we look and we see this pandemic, and we see things that are happening in our lives, and things that are going on, and how it's not normal and stuff like that. But God, when we really look at this, you're working behind the scenes. There's things that you are doing that we can't even see. And you're going to come out being glorified in all this. But Lord, as we go into this message, I pray that your words will be spoken. I pray that somehow I can just get out of your way, and we can, and you can show us just how great you truly are. Lord, I thank you for what you do. In Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen. You know, in wartime, as troops are trying to advance, the other troops will try to sabotage their way to advancing. They'll use things like landmines and booby traps, and maybe some snipers setting up to pick people off or whatever. One of the most efficient ways is to set up a tripwire, to where you put a wire running across to explosive devices, and when somebody comes walking along and they trip that wire, those devices go off. The main thing with tripwires is try to get as many people with that explosive device as you can. You just don't want to get to one. You want to get as many as we can. And I start thinking about our Christian walk, and how hard it is in this world to have a Christian walk, and how Satan will set tripwires for us. And he wants us to come by, and he wants us to trip on those wires, not only just to get us, but to get everybody around us. He wants to have as much damage possible with as little effort as it is. And so that's what we're looking at. And then in our Christian walk, because it's hard enough, but then we have the enemy always trying to trip us up. You know, as I said, this book about Esther, we all know the story about a young Jewish orphan becoming queen of Persia. It's really an amazing story of how God works in our life. And we get here, and we get to this book, and I start reading on some of the background and how the theologians don't really even know who wrote it. They know it was a Jewish male that wrote it. They can't really pinpoint on who it was, just because of the way that he wrote and talked about other things. So they know it was Jewish. The setting of the story is in the city of Susa, which is in Persia, nation of Persia. The book dates around 460 BC. And it was before Ezra and Nehemiah left to go build the walls back up in Jerusalem. So it's predate right before Ezra and all that does that. Really, I think the author's central purpose is to show how sovereign God is, and to show how Esther was used to help with the deliverance of the Israelites, but not being annihilated. And One of the biggest things that's standing out in this book, though, is the fact that there's complete absence of any explicit reference to God, worship, prayer, or sacrifice. There is maybe a prayer is mentioned in there, but how God is not even mentioned in the book. And that makes some theologians say that the book shouldn't even be in there, and that because there's no reference to that, that they believe that Esther is just probably not a good book. But I really disagree with that. Because I think that even though sometimes in our lives we feel like God's not involved in our lives, that we know that He's there. And we know that He's working. And so I really disagree. I really think that the author deliberately refrained from mentioning God or any religious activity to just really heighten the fact that God is in control, even though we don't think He is. Even though He's not being mentioned or whatever, the world wants to try to shun God and say that, but we understand that God is totally in control, that He is sovereign on everything. His rule is what it is. And we get here to chapter 1. And we're really going to see an unrestrained appetite of King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes. It's the same guy. It's King Ahasuerus who is mainly mentioned. And this guy has some unbridled cravings. He is really fleshly. He lusts. He has an unrestrained appetite. He inherited this great Persian empire from his illustrious grandfather Cyrus and his father Darius. They had built this empire. He ruled it for about 19 years, from 465 BC, 486 BC to 465 BC. And we see that as the story unfolds and how God uses this king and his unbridled appetites, his lust and stuff, how he uses that to place Queen Esther in that spot where she can be a force for God's people. So let's dig into the scripture. And let's talk about verses 1 through 9. It says, now it took place in the days of Ahasuerus, who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. In those days, as King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa, in the third year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all the princes in attendance, the army officials of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of his province, being in his presence. And he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days, 180 days. When these days were completed, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in the citadel in Susa. From the greatest to the least, in the court of the garden of the king's palace, there were hangings of fine white and violet linen, held by cords of fine purple lined with silver rings and marble columns, and couches of gold and silver of a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds, and the royal wine was plentiful according to the king's bounty. The drinking was done according to the law. There was no compulsion, for so the king had given orders to each official of his household that he should do according to the desires of each person. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. Now, King Ahasuerus ruled over this. It was a vast kingdom. I mean, it stretched all the way from India, which includes Pakistan, to Kush, or well, it's Ethiopia right now. And up to this point, Persia was the largest military formed government anywhere. And so it was really split up into different states and provinces. There was some 20 political satraps and 127 political provinces with states and the way he had it out. And so King Ahasuerus, like the third year into his rule, decided to throw a banquet for 180 days. You realize that's 6 months. But what this was really, he did it for multiple reasons. He did it to secure the loyalty of his followers. He did it to lay plans of strategies for ruling the nation and for launching military campaigns. He just didn't throw a big banquet to be throwing a banquet. He did it for reasons. Okay? And what they really, for the 6 months, it wasn't just a big party for 6 months. He probably rotated the people in and out, because you take away all the leaders and everybody out of country for 6 months. What are you going to go back to? Probably no whole lot of nothing. And so it was kind of a rotating. He would have meetings with different ones while there was banquets going on. But at the end of the 6 months, he has a 7-day feast. It's a blowout. It's a party. It's nothing but just to celebrate that the planning was over. They got things going on. And it's another thing that he wanted to profitably display his wealth and his dazzling luxury. I mean, he held nothing back. I mean, he had beautiful, costly drapes and marble pillars, couches of gold and silver. He had the most expensive linen and ribbons and the attached to silver rings. He had all this stuff. He had goblets, gold goblets of wine. And really they were all different. You know, they were handing them out to different people. And they were all kind of unique in their own way. And they were told to drink what you want to drink. It's an open bar. Go get what you want. Don't hold anything back here. Go to that bar. Go. Let's have a party. Let's really celebrate this thing. And so you can go and do all that stuff. And while he was having his party and holding his banquet, Queen Vashti was having her own. There was no law or rules, and they couldn't have a banquet together. But for some reason, they were separated. And she was holding her own banquet while he was having his banquet. And this guy was a guy of enormous wealth. And he had a life of extravagance, pleasure, luxury, comfort, and ease. He had an inflated sense of importance. And he delighted in showing off his wealth and demonstrating his power and his authority. Man, I started thinking about that. You know, how God warns us against living that way. Living in extravagance and indulgence and excessive. He warns us against being selfish, against neglecting the desperate needs of the world. So many people are crying for help. God doesn't say that we can't have nice things. God doesn't say that we can't have money and we can't save up. But what he does want us to do is to give and to help people. Not to store it up just for ourselves, but to be able to use our money and do the thing and to help other people. Jesus says in Matthew 6:19-20, do not store up yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in or steal. There's one thing to have some money to help people. There's another thing to live an extraordinary lifestyle and just disregard God altogether. But we go on, we move forward. Verses 10-12, this is where it kind of gets a little interesting. It says, on the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehun, Biztha, Harbona, Bigitha, Abagatha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king and her royal crown in order to display her beauty in the people and the princes, for she was beautiful. The Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command delivered by the eunuchs. Then the king became very angry, and his wrath burned within him. So we see on the 7th day of the feast that the king and his guests no doubt were drunk. I mean, I'm sure that they've been drunk and probably filled with lust from watching all those slave girls come and wait on them, and they would always have seductive type dancing at these things and stuff like that. So in a moment of passion, the king decided he wanted to display the beauty of his queen so they could gaze upon her. He wanted his queen to come, wanted her to wear her crown. She was evidently a very attractive woman, and he wanted to display her in front of everybody and say, this is my wife. I want you to look at her. Aren't you envious of who I have? Aren't you envious of her beauty? Don't you wish that you could have, you know, and that's what he's really wanting to do, and that was his prized possession. And he instructed to go get her and to wear his crown and to make sure she looked beautiful. Oh, but she refused. She says, I'm not coming out there of those drunken men to be gazed upon, to be lust after, to be groped upon. I'm not going to do that type of stuff. And she defied his command. And upon receiving that news of her defiance, can you imagine, he being the type of man that he is, he got mad. He became furious. He burned with anger. You know, he's in a drunken rage. I can see this man being that way. Just being, you know, just that drunken, when we've seen people with that, and just, I can't believe that she didn't do this, and I can't, and just being, man, because, see, that's what, to me, what drunkenness does. It makes you a different person. It can cause people to lose control of the reason and behavior. And despite it, the world says, hey, drinking with friends, it's okay. It's natural. That's what we should do. That's what we should do. It's a natural enjoyment of life. It's accepting among your peers. And I'm not saying that drinking is a sin, because I'll never say that. What I'm saying is that drunkenness is. And I think anytime that anything that takes place instead of Christ, that you put in front of God, in front of Christ, is a sin. We cannot make any room for the flesh, but only for Christ. Romans 13 to 14 said, let us behave properly as in the day, not in carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual promiscuity and sensuality, not in strife and jealousy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh in regard to its lust. I think that says it all right there, what Paul is saying, that whatever takes the place of Christ. But I want to move on as we see that he is angry, and we're going to see what he does. Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for it was the custom of the king, so to speak, before all who knew law and justice and were close to him, Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Mers, Marsena, and Mecum, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who also had access to the king's presence and sat in the first palace in the kingdom, according to the law. What is to be done with Queen Vashti, because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus, delivered by the eunuchs? In the presence of the king and the princes, Memucan said, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also all the princes and all the people who are in the providence of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's conduct will be known to all the women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands by saying, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought into his presence, but she did not come. This day the ladies of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's conduct, will speak in the same way to all the king's princes. There will be plenty of contempt and anger. If it pleases the king, let a royal edict be issued by him, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be repealed, that Vashti may no longer come into the presence of King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is more worthy than she. And when the king's edict, which he will make it heard throughout all of his kingdom, great as it is, then all women will give honor to their husbands, great and small. This word pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan proposed. So he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province according to his script, and every people according to their language, that every man should be the master in his own house, and the one who speaks in the language of their own people. So we see that he was mad, he flew this fit of rage, and he goes and he consults his inner circle and asks them, what should I do? This is not right. This cannot be, this cannot be done right. It has to be, something's got to be done with this. Because the king's word was law. If the king said something, it had to be obeyed. No matter what. If he said this is going to be done, then it was going to be done. And because if it didn't happen, then there would be chaos throughout his kingdom. Well, that person didn't listen to him, so why do I have to listen to him, right? And so if the queen is saying that she's not going to come in, then is he losing control of his kingdom? There might be a coup. You never know what's going to happen. But on top of that, you got to remember, back in these days, women were a possession. They didn't have, it's not like the women of today, they were a possession. And so what are we going to do with the queen who defies the king? All that's going to do is have repercussions, and the women in the household are going to start thinking they have a say. And they can do what they want to do, and that cannot happen. You got to understand, that's the way it was back then. And so they come up with just dethrone her, divorce her, tell her she can never come in your sight again. I mean, that's a pretty big thing, going from queen to not ever being in that presence, to totally being excommunicated from all the things and luxuries that she had and all that. And so that's what they came up with. This is what's going to happen. We can't have this. They're saying, like, we can't have this. That's uncalled for. That is insubordination, and she was charged with that. And that was truly something that was no way that could ever happen. And they said, what we'll do is we'll find you another queen that's even better than her, that will fit your needs. And I think about our society, and I think about women in our society, and how our society sends a message on the value on how beautiful or attractive a woman is. You just look at the commercials on TV, you just look at things on Facebook and everything it is, and it's all about, well, if you're pretty enough, you can do this and do that. And I truly don't believe that. You get Proverbs 31 and you start reading that, and it talks about what a godly woman is. And I tell you what, a woman's worth is more on how pretty they are on the inside than they are ever on the outside. And I believe in our society that women ought to be treated as equals and with respect. I truly believe that. You know, Proverbs 12:4 says an excellent wife is the crown of her husband. And that's wholeheartedly right. And I get to this point, and I really started thinking about my points. And I think about the things that really tripped up King Ahasuerus. Things that really tripped him up because of him being so prideful, of him of taking advice. And the things that tripped him up, and I'm like, man, in our Christian walk, there are so many things that can trip us up. If we allow them to trip them up. And so I got 3 points here that I want to talk about. As Christ's disciples, we cannot get tripped up by pride. Pride. That's first and foremost. I started looking at pride, and it's one of the 7 deadly sins there is. It's nothing in the Bible that says it's the 7 deadly sins. I mean, there's nothing like a list of sins like that in the Bible, but it's a grouping of vices. It's along with Christian teaching. And what it does, it doesn't, these things enhance our own natural facilities. Okay? And you got pride and greed and wrath and envy and lust and gluttony and slothfulness. You know, and it's not saying that you have it, but these things enhance those. Like gluttony abuses our desires to eat. Okay? Not just to eat normal, but to eat too much. And that's gluttony. And we've talked about this in our small groups, and we've talked about this on Wednesday nights, and even from the pulpit. We all think that pride is the main one out of those 7. Out of any sin, pride scratches the surface. If you scratch that surface, pride is right there. Pride convinces lust that my pleasure comes before God's priorities. It convinces laziness that someone else should do it for us. It convinces anger that if we don't get our way, someone will have to pay. Pride convinces gluttony that I better get my fill. Pride convinces greed that the more I have, the more I will be satisfied. Pride convinces envy that I deserve better than you. Pride is defined as high or inordinate opinion of one's own dignity, importance, merits, or superiority. And you're going to use terms like egotistical, arrogant, selfish, vain, conceited, boastful, and big-headed. Pride is an arrogant, it is self-worship. And I think as a Christian, that pride is something that really we cannot have. Because when we start getting prideful, when we start being boastful, when we start thinking that we're better than everybody else, I really think that it's a spiritual cancer. C.L. Lewis says, for pride is a spiritual cancer. It eats up the very possibility of love or contentment or even common sense. Psalms 10:4 says, the wicked in their haughtiness or pridefulness of his countenance does not seek him. All of his thoughts are, there is no God, because you're putting yourself before God. Proverbs 21:4 says, haughty eyes and a proud heart, the lamp of the wicked is sin. So, we see in Proverbs that it is sin. 1 Peter 5:5, it says that God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble. So proud, being proud, I really believe it's something we get tripped up on, because when we're prideful, we can put ourselves above God sometimes. We won't let God work in our lives. We won't let God do what's called for us to do, and we try to put ourselves before God. And we can't get tripped up by pride. I think that's something we do. The next thing I want us to see, as Christ's disciples, we cannot get tripped up by worldly advice. By worldly advice. Advice can be a wonderful thing. when we get them from the right person, or it can be an absolute disaster. I bet all of us can think of some bad advice you probably received when you was younger, or some, maybe you gave some bad advice when that you did. But we are going to get advice, and we're going to give advice. You know, Proverbs 15:22 says, without consultation, plans are frustrated. With many counselors, they succeed. So there are good advice. When your mom wants to give you advice, you need to listen to your mom. She's probably been around for a long time, but you got to weigh that advice also, you know. And if you don't want your mom's advice, you're going to get your mom's advice regardless. So when she says, I got some advice for you, you say, okay, and you just take it how it is. But man, there's sometimes you want to give out sometimes you want to get some well-intentioned good advice, but it really turns out to be bad advice. Here's some examples, okay? Ladies, if you really want this, I think it would work. If you want something around your house, just continue to nag your husband constantly. I think it'll get done quicker that way. If you just stay on him and nag and nag and nag and nag, they won't ever get upset over that. So just okay, guys. There's some advice for you. Like this winter when it gets slick outside, just for traction, just drive some 2-inch nails into your tires. You be able to get some traction that way. Out there on the snow and ice. Okay, I think that's some good advice. Back in 1950, a newspaper ad said, with a smiling mom and a healthy baby, for a better life, start drinking Coca-Cola early. Okay, that was some advice they put in a newspaper. And I know everybody's married here, but guys, if you really want to impress your wife or your girlfriend, and they say they don't want nothing for their birthday, don't get them anything. Just say, see, I'm a good listener to you, honey. I'm listening to what you say, and so I'm a good listener. Just don't get them anything. That's some good advice, right? No. Not really, okay? We can learn that not all advice is good. Not all advice is right, especially when it comes from people who love us. You know, Paul, man, when he was sailing to Rome, and they were there in Acts, I think it's around 27, and they were in the port, and he's like, hey, we do not need to go back out. If we go back out, the way the winds are blowing, we're going to get crushed. We're going to have loss and damage. But the captain gets together with the crew, and they come to the decision to do what? To set sail. And guess what? When you read that, you see, man, they almost lost their lives. You know, sometimes we just need to understand that not all advice is good advice. I believe that there's a lot of times you can go down the wrong path and do the wrong thing when you listen to the wrong advice. There's certain things that's good, godly advice. And when you go to a person, you know that they're looking out for your best interest. I can understand that, even though it might not be what you want to hear. But I think we get tripped up, even in our Christian walk, when we take worldly advice. When we take advice from people that really don't know the situation. I know when I cancel people, when I talk to people, I really try not to give advice. I try to talk to them and tell them maybe what I would do, but sometimes we just got to understand that worldly advice will trip up a Christian more so than anything else at any time. So my last point I want to see is I want to try to wrap this up. As Christ's disciples, we cannot get tripped up by toxic relationships. Toxic relationships. Man, the term toxic is defined as of relating to or caused by a toxin or another poison. The word relationship is the condition or fact of being related, connection, or association. So a toxic relationship is the condition of being poisoned by a particular connection or association. By being poisoned by a particular connection or association. Man, I think about toxic relationships and how emotionally and how things can get destroyed, your health and your life over having toxic relationships. You know, toxins can really hurt. They can degrade. They're abrasive. They'll roll things away. And if you're in a toxic relationship, that's what will happen. Man, if it's unhealthy, it really will be stagnant. It will be reduced down to nothing. It will be deflated. It will become lower and lower. You know, and Paul tells us that we should not have relationships like that. In 2 Corinthians 6:14 and 15, he says, do not be bound together with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness and lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? Or what harmony has Christ with Belial? Or what has a believer in common with an unbeliever? Paul is saying that don't be yoked together with unbelievers. I mean, I think you need to be all things to all people, and I really think that we need to be a light in the darkness, but he says that we need to watch what we're doing. I think there's a line drawn. He urges us not to form binding relationship with non-believers. He said that will weaken your Christian commitment, integrity, and standards. I don't think there's anything more dangerous than being in a relationship with someone who's not a believer, whose lifestyle is totally opposite of what God does. And I've seen so many good youth go down the wrong path because they started dating somebody who was not a believer, and how they just gradually just got pulled away and pulled away and pulled away. And I'm not talking drugs or alcohol, which that is would be a very toxic relationship to get involved in something like that. I'm just talking about somebody who's a non-believer. Man, in the Old Testament, God continually told the Israelites, do not mingle, do not marry with the pagan nations. And he didn't say that because he didn't like them. He said that because he knew once they intermingled, once they came in, that the idols would be set up and things would happen and they would start falling away from God. And I think a toxic relationship will trip up a Christian quicker than most anything else, because you get pulled away. You don't make God a priority. So to wrap up, Satan is behind all these things. Satan doesn't want us to go for it. He wants to try to trip us up. He wants to hurt our witness as a Christian. He wants to be able to have people look at us and say, you're a Christian, you act like that, you do those type of things. And he'll do anything he can to make us feel like a failure. And he does that by trying to make us prideful. I think that's the first and foremost. If he can make us prideful, he's got us won. I think he does that by putting people in our life that's going to lead us in the wrong direction and give us the wrong type of advice. Man, our Christian walk is hard. It's not something that's easy. It's something that we have to do every single day. And we need to make sure we're following God and his word and doing what he is calling us to do. And we need to be on guard at all times, and we don't get tripped up. I wholeheartedly believe that God used King Ahasuerus in that situation there. But man, Satan was able to use his pride. Was able to get wrong advice, and he was able to do those type of things. We're going to see that God is at work at all times. And as Christians, we need to try to continue to follow him instead of being tripped up. Please stand as I close this in prayer. Lord, Heavenly Father, I just thank you so much for what you do. You are the King of kings and Lord of lords, and there's no one who is greater than you. Lord, I pray that as we continue through our life and continue to do these things, I pray that we can be followers of you. And Lord, that we don't get tripped up by the little things in our life. That path is not straight. It's a hard path to walk. But God, I know with you, guidance and directness, that we have the ability to do that. Lord, thank you for what you do. In Jesus Christ's name I pray.